Thank you. And as Dennis said, it was a real privilege to be able to get the leadership of all of our businesses together to discuss open with you some of the elements of innovation and growth. And thank you, Dennis, for chairing and guiding us through those questions. We have a wonderful next item presentation to cover, a very interesting and diverse view of innovation by someone who has a great amount of experience in the field. Innovation management. There isn't a business in America that doesn't want to be more creative in its thinking, products, and processes. Tom Kelly knows how to foster a culture of creativity and develop processes for continuous innovation. Tom is the general manager of a highly regarded organization called IDEO, the widely admired design and development firm that brought us innovations such as the Apple Mouse originally, the Palm 5, and literally hundreds of other cutting-edge products and services over the years, consistently viewed by organizations such as Fast Company. They listed IDEO as number 5 in its 2008 list of the world's 50 most innovative companies. So the question was, what is an innovative company? Well, you have one right here in Tom Kelly and IDEO. So please welcome to Merit's Innovation Symposium, Tom Kelly.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
All right. Well, hi. Good afternoon. So I'm going to talk about nurturing a culture of innovation, and I know that's a topic that you're working on today, and that is central to the organization right now. And it felt like when I started my career in the creativity and innovation space almost 30 years ago, it felt like we were way off at the side. That we were having this kind of optional fun at the kids' table, but that the real work, the serious work of the enterprise was happening in conference rooms and boardrooms down the hall. And luckily for us, that has changed dramatically. That creativity and innovation are now central to almost every company I know. I mean, maybe if in the antique French wine business, you don't have to be thinking about creativity and innovation every day. But for the rest of us, it is really important. It's almost essential to keeping our businesses going. So I'm going to talk about fostering a culture of creativity and innovation. And some of you may have seen this survey last year on this topic. It was from Adobe, the software company. And Adobe had this survey. You can see the whole survey online. It was called State of Create. And Adobe they asked questions of 5,000 people in 5 different developed countries. And they asked them questions about creativity in general and about themselves personally. Right? And so the first question asked is about the connection between creativity and economic growth. And as I said, there was a time when people didn't make this connection, but according to this survey with 5,000 people, they do make this connection today. 80% of people, when asked about whether they think unlocking creativity is critical to economic growth, 80% said yes. And I love that they worded it in this way, unlocking creativity. Because all of our research has found you don't have to teach creativity, you don't have to inject creativity. All you have to do is find it. It is buried deeper in some people than others. All you have to do is find it and unlock that creativity. Right? And so this is now a widely held belief in developed countries about the link between them. But more important, more interesting to me was the follow-up question. So, okay, we acknowledge the general importance of creativity, but how about you? How about you as an individual? Do you have a chance to live up to your creative potential? Right? And when they asked that question, only 25% of people said yes. And so think of that as an organization or as a leader, or even as a nation. Think about what that means. Right? Only 25% of the population believes that they have a chance to bring their whole selves to work. Believes that they have a chance to express all of their creative potential. And wow, that is an opportunity. Right? Because shame on us if we are leaving 75% of that potential untapped, if we're leaving all of that money on the table. Right? And so my brother and I, working with my brother who founded our firm, and we're probably at this point playing in the 4th quarter of our careers, right? And so we've pretty much decided to devote our 4th quarter not just to innovation, and we still love innovation, but to innovators, right? To helping people tap into that creativity, to dipping into that reserve, because we all work in a world of constrained resources. There's never enough budget, there's never enough schedule, right? And so if there's this free resource just sitting there waiting to be tapped, we want to tap it. And so, the way we would express this at IDEO, we seem to start almost every sentence with the expression, how might we? The way we would express this is, how might we unlock the creative potential of that other 75%? And we think this is a worthy task for us. We think it's a worthy task for our clients as well, because it is there and it's available to you, and it is a source of significant competitive advantage if you can tap into all of that. And so we've come to explore this idea that we call creative confidence, which we would define as the natural human ability. We really believe it is a natural ability to come up with creative ideas combined with the courage to act on them. And it turns out in all of our research and interviews, it turns out that the courage part is at least as important. Because when we talk to people, what they say is, oh yeah, I have lots of ideas, but I don't always want to raise my hand. They say, in my company, if you raise your hand, you get a lot of attention. You get the devil's advocates come after you. Sometimes it's easier not to say anything. And so they go through the whole meeting and they don't say anything, and their idea goes unspoken, right? It becomes unavailable to the rest of the company. And so it turns out that both coming up with the idea and acting on it and having the courage to bring your idea, to put your idea on the table, both incredibly important. So I spent 6 years, including 2 years full-time, 7 days a week, working with my brother on this book on that same topic about creative confidence. And we interviewed over 100 people, and face-to-face or via Skype, and for a long period of time. And it was really amazing. It was so much fun. These were people, without exception, these were people who had what we call flipped, who had gone from considering themselves not creative to considering themselves creative. And these people are so much fun to be around. I mean, they glow. They are having so much fun. And so what we found is when they flipped that switch, because what happened is sometime in their childhood, they opted out of creativity. It happens for a lot of people around the 4th grade, where they say, well, I'm not creative, right? And as soon as they do that, their world gets a little smaller, right? But then as adults, they reverse that process. And so they are not just creative, they take on bigger challenges. They have more resilience in the face of obstacles. They have more perseverance to see something all the way to the end, right? And these people are really fun to be around. And I'm not going to talk about all 100 interviews today, I promise. But I want to give you one, and I'll touch on one or two later. But just as a kind of a warm-up, I want to tell you about one of the really endearing interviews, one of the people that I just so admired when I heard her whole story. And this is a story about a young woman named Jill Levinson. And Jill worked in the advertising industry. And if it weren't enough that people, want to characterize, everyone as creative or non-creative, right? You go into advertising and, there's a department, right? The creatives, right? And if you're not in that department with the creatives, draw your own conclusion, right? And so Jill worked for an ad agency, and sure enough, she was not in the creative group, and she accepted that, she accepted that stigma. She accepted that characterization of her. And she was actually quite creative even then, but she eventually left that job. And what she said, yeah, I'm not really creative. She says, I love to cook. And Jill actually makes these wonderful, she decorates cakes, and they're beautiful. You could take a picture of them, and in fact, she does. But her work, she's so thoughtful about things. But she says, well, I didn't make this recipe from scratch. She says, I didn't create this recipe, and I got the inspiration for this design for looking at other people's stuff. So, I'm not really creative. I didn't make this stuff up, right? And so a couple of things happened. One is Jill, just for fun, on the side, started fooling around with Pinterest. Any Pinterest users here? A few guys raised their hand. Just let me tell you, I've been to Pinterest, and they don't care about you. They're not thinking about you even 1% of the time. They're only interested in the women. I've never been anywhere where I was so ignored. No, you are not our customer. Oh, we'll let you onto our site, but no. So anyhow, so Jill starts fooling around with Pinterest, and she's just, clipping things, and as you know, it's a very visual site, and she picks up these images, and, she's got 6 followers, 6 of her girlfriends are following her, but her stuff is pretty good. And so the friends tell friends, and then she's got 100 followers, and pretty soon she's got like 1,000 followers. And then she does this one, sometimes there's a tipping point, as Malcolm Gladwell will say. And so the tipping point for Jill was she posts this thing about these piñata cookies. They're shaped like a donkey's, and they're 3 layers, and in the middle layer are M&Ms. Anybody ever seen the piñata cookie post? Anyhow, so she posts this, and next thing she knows, and she's doing this just totally for fun on the side, she has 100,000 followers. And then Pinterest itself says, hey, what's happening with this Jill Levinson woman? And they feature her on the site, and then she has 1 million followers. And that, when I finished up the manuscript of the book, she had 1 million. She's at 1.85 million. She's going to hit 2 million here pretty soon, right? And Jill, in the process, redefined herself. She said, you know what? I am creative. She says, I don't make up these recipes. She says, I didn't make up the recipe for piñata cookies. But she says, my followers tell me that I have a creative eye, right? That they like my curatorial skill, that I have an eye for collecting creative ideas. And so in the process, Jill has stretched the definition of creativity. And in doing so, she stepped inside that magic circle instead of outside the magic circle. And it affects everything about her life, right? She's actually taken on a bigger role. She is now actually on the creative side of work. But, I wrote all these stories in the book, and there were stories that we had to shorten the book by about 50%. And so I wrote Jill's story, and then it got set aside. It was not going to be in the book until I ran into Jill's mom one day in Los Angeles. And she just could not stop talking about how Jill was different, and she was excited, and she was doing new things, and she'd just, come into her own, right? And so this is what it's like for the people who find this creative confidence. It changes a lot of parts of their lives, but, the part that we're the most interested is in the work part of their life. So with Jill as just a kind of a introductory story, I want to talk about 3 ideas, about 3 things that we've noticed that these people with creative confidence do to nurture and reinforce their abilities. And this is by far the most important. They start with empathy, right? They know when confronted with a new problem, they know that they're pretty smart. They have a lot of ideas in their head. They have informed intuition, but they also know that there's more ideas outside their brain than inside their brain. And so they supplement their knowledge. And sometimes it's a matter of bringing their knowledge up to date. They supplement their knowledge by going out in the world and observing humans firsthand. And humans firsthand are pretty quirky, as you may know, right? And so in the difference between the way you think people behave and the way they actually behave, often that is the opportunity for innovation. That's the opportunity to do something creative in the world. And so I would urge you, both as individuals and as leaders, to encourage people around you to get out in the field and see something. No matter how high you are in the organization, there's still learning to be had out in the world. And if you do this, if you think of it as kind of an empathy process with an empathy toolkit, I have 2 tips for you if you go out and actually practice this yourself. Tip number 1 is not enough to ask questions, right? There's either was or it's just about to be a presentation about big data, right? More and more and more, we've got the process data that reaches us at our desk. And that's really good, and big data is going to become more and more and more valuable in the world. But there is some stuff that we're just never going to show up on a survey, right? You get the written survey, you get the online survey. People write in, they check all the boxes, and they write in comments, and they still are not going to give you, we believe, some of the best insights. And so this is why, we always are out in the field. Every day we've got teams out there looking at what are humans doing. And so here's an example of that. It's a group out of our Munich office in Germany is working for a pharma company, and they're asking, they're in the home of this elderly lady, and as you can see, she's got rheumatoid arthritis, right? A very common disease in people of her age, and it limits her dexterity, and so they're looking at her hands and trying to see how she manipulates things, and we asked this question that relates to our client's business. We asked this question about medicine bottles. So, you got rheumatoid arthritis. Any trouble opening the medicine bottles? And so here's what she says. Word for word, translated from the German. She says, medicine bottles don't give me any real trouble, right? So it's so wonderful to get that data at your desk, right? Because you're right there. You got your coffee cup right there. It's air conditioned. Nobody's asking you hard questions. right? You sit at your desk and you get this in the comments section of the survey data. You get this data, say you're a pharma company, but you've got your own data coming to you, right? And so you say you get this data and it says, medicine bottles don't give me any real trouble. What would you be tempted to conclude? Right? You might. No one could hold it against you if you concluded that for this particular survey respondent, medicine bottles don't give her any real trouble. But you'd be wrong because she is lying to you. And we catch people lying every time we go out. Now, she's somebody's grandmother. She doesn't think she's lying. She doesn't mean to lie, but she is flat out lying, right? And so since we're there, right, we're not getting this at the desk with our coffee cup. We are there sitting in her living room in Munich. We go to step 2 and say, well, can we see? Can you show us? And she, because she doesn't think she's lying, she's perfectly happy to show us. She says, oh, sure, follow me. And I'm not in the living room with her. It's my team. But so the team follows her from the living room into the kitchen, at which point she approaches the meat slicer, right? And I don't know about you, but every time I see this photograph, my brain just zooms in, and I ask myself, how close is her index finger to that splitting blade, right? Like, look at, like, does that say to you, danger, danger? It does to me, right? And by the way, one of our German engineers who was there on the same visit, because there's a few people there with her in the kitchen, says, and I don't think this meat slicer does very well either, I'm worried about her fingers. He's worried about the meat slicer, right? So medicine bottles don't give her any real trouble. She's got a workaround. She slices the cap off with the meat slicer. And those pharma companies, they put those medicines in the little brown sealed bottles for a reason. They don't like light and they don't like air. And anybody think this cap is going back on that bottle? I don't think so, right? And so your data, the data says no problem, right? But on the ground, in the field, starting with empathy, it's like, okay, big problem, got to solve this one, right? Because she's not going to complain at all until she starts slicing her finger up, and then you'll hear the complaint, right? And so tip number 1 is, got to go beyond asking. You got to observe. You got to try things out. You got to learn from people. And so here's tip number 2. Tip number 2 is, don't think about the millions. At the front end of innovation, of course, at the back end, you want to serve millions of customers. Of course, all of our clients do. They want to serve customers around the world, right? But at the front end of innovation, don't watch the millions, watch the ones, right? Because you get inspiration, you get insight from the individuals, right? And so I spent a lot of time in Japan, and I'm there one day at the Shibuya station. No, sorry. This one's Shinjuku station, busiest train station in the world. 3.4 million people go through that train station every day. So if you just take a step back, you got big data. You got like millions of people walking by you. It's mainly Japanese guys in black suits, right? But anyhow, lots and lots of people there. But we don't get inspiration from the lots. We look at individuals. So I'm standing on the platform in Shinjuku Station one day with a material scientist friend of mine, Kara Johnson. And we just happened to notice, we're standing there, just the normal course of business in Tokyo, just waiting for that train. But then we happened to notice that young lady on the left, and here, let me zoom in a little bit, that young lady has shoes that don't match. And so I said to Kara, hey, what are we seeing here? Right? Because you get in that moment where the world doesn't fit exactly with your view of what's happening in the world, like, well, what is that? And so we only got like 3 minutes before the train comes in Tokyo. So Kara and I go into brainstorming mode. Oh, wait, here's a third tip. Guys, if you're out in the world doing this research, don't be taking pictures of Japanese schoolgirls, right? So I did not take this photo. This was Kara. Kara took this photo. Anyhow, so Kara and I are brainstorming. It's like, okay, what are we seeing? Theory number 1 is this young lady has a pair of shoes almost exactly like these at home, right? Except with the orange on the right, of course, right? Theory number 2, this young lady has a girlfriend with the same shoe size. Right? But theory number 3, which was the most interesting to me that day, theory number 3 was maybe there's a business opportunity for a footwear manufacturer, a footwear retailer, to sell mismatched footwear. Right? So I'll just let that idea hang in the air long enough for you to like slam your brains closed on it, right? That's an absurd idea, and maybe, but maybe you'll give that idea slightly more credit. Let me see if I can use this director's chair. If I tell you that I get my socks from a company that will not sell you a matched pair. If you want your socks to match, mine do today. If you want your socks to match, you got to buy two unmatched sets of 3, and then you match them up, and then you got 3 pair that all match. Right? And this little company has grown like gangbusters. They opened up a flagship store on Fifth Avenue, New York. They're in all the Disney locations. They're in airport locations. They have done wonderfully with this silly, perhaps crazy idea of mismatched footwear. Right? And so sometimes when you're out, you're observing individuals, and you see quirky behavior, before your brain completely rejects it, think about it for a little bit. In fact, this is a central theme when we're working, especially with senior executives. We refer back to Marcel Proust, who said, the real act of discovery consists not in finding new lands, but in seeing with fresh eyes, seeing with new eyes. And so this gets increasingly harder as you go through your career, right? Lots of expertise here in the room, and that expertise is extremely valuable to your company. But in the process of developing that expertise, you've learned to screen out the distractions and the anomalies. And sometimes, like with the mismatched shoes, sometimes the anomaly is the opportunity, right? And so we believe in this idea of, the seeing with new eyes so much that we've coined a term, well, really borrowed a term to describe this, especially for senior people. So there's this term that's in the dictionary. In fact, it's near as I can tell, it's in every language in the world, untranslated from the French. Déjà vu, right? Been there before, right? But this mental state we're talking about, it's not déjà vu, it's the opposite of déjà vu, and so we call it vujade, right? And vujade is when you're in a place you've been many, many, many times before, but you see it with fresh eyes. You start to ask the why questions. Well, why do we do it that way? Why do we make them fill out that form twice? Why do we, make them wait for that? Why do we start out that way? Right? And as soon as you start asking those why questions based on vujade, you will see all kinds of opportunities. And I would recommend that you try to exercise this muscle looking at other people's businesses. But once you get fit, once you develop this capability for vujade, you will see it in your own business as well. Right? And I'll give you an example from my life. And vujade, I was flying, it's been a couple years back now, I was flying down to Sao Paulo, Brazil. I was flying on United Airlines out of San Francisco, where I'm based, and I happened to listen that day. I'm not sure why. I started listening to the airline video on United Airlines, that safety video. So anybody in the audience ever heard the safety video on an airline, right? You've all heard it at least 100 times. So I happen to have heard this one 1,000 times because I fly every week, right? And so, but this day I heard it, and they start talking about, there's that section, and you've all got it somewhere, in the recesses of your memory, you've all got this video recorded somewhere too. They start talking about the yellow oxygen mask coming down, and how you put it on yourself first, and then the child, and they talk about you got to tug it to turn it on, and now that I'm listening, that's very unspecific. You tug it hard enough to turn on, but not too hard. You'll pull the tube out of the socket, right? So, we could be more specific than that. But anyhow, never mind that. The part that gets really interesting, now that I'm actually listening, the part that gets really interesting, they start talking about that clear plastic bag that's attached to the yellow oxygen, to the yellow mask. And what they said that day on United Airlines is this. They said, although the bag may not inflate, and at other aircraft at the same company at the same time, they said, although the bag does not inflate, and I'm thinking, okay, which is it? May not inflate, does not inflate, because those are two different things, right? So, although the bag may not inflate, oxygen is flowing to the mask. And I have this vujade moment, and I realize, hey, they are apologizing, aren't they? What they're saying is, we could have made this mask work a little better, but we decided to make a product, a really important product with no interface at all, right? Back in the history of bad interfaces, many of you too young to remember this, back before LEDs, the steam irons of my childhood, they just heated up. Right? And state of the art, circa 1960, was to, when the steam iron was on, you would lick your finger and you would put it to the face of a hot iron. And yes, kids, of course we burn our finger that way. But But having burned our finger, we'd be darn sure the thing was on. As opposed to this mask for United Airlines, where the first sign you're sure, you're positive that mask is not working is when you pass out, right? And so, could they put a green LED on that? Yes, of course they could. They could make it flash. That would not be hard, but they chose not to, right? And so is my point that they should redesign that mask on United Airlines? No. I mean, of course they should, but that's not my point. My point is, how did I miss it? How did I miss it 999 times? This stuff is right in front of you, and you're not seeing it. And I'm not seeing it either, right? And so you got to have this, see with new eyes. You got to have this mental state of vujade, and you will see all kinds of things. And so, in the business context, this is one of my favorite interviews from the books. Was a guy named Doug Dietz, and some of you may have seen Doug did a TED Talk on this subject. Doug is this very smart, very earnest guy, works for GE Healthcare, and he designs medical imaging machines, scanners, MRI machines, CAT scanners, things like that. And Doug is really proud of his work. He's in the healthcare industry, saves lives. He really thinks it's great. And so he works on a project, goes like 2.5 years. And then when the product, the thing that he creates goes out in the world, then he wants to go see it, in situ, right? They call it voice of the customer at GE, where you go and you see, and you get some feedback. And so he does this. He gets invited to a local children's hospital, and he goes and looks at his machine. He's so proud of it. And he goes to the technician that operates the machine and asks her a series of questions. And Doug, telling the story today, says, I am so embarrassed about those questions that I asked her. He said 100% of my questions were aimed at patting myself on the back. Right? Did you notice this new feature we put in? Did you notice we fixed this? Did you notice that, did you know we had it's up for a big award? Right? It was all that kind of question. And he said, I was done. I'd asked all my questions. I was good to go. I was going back to my team to tell them what a great job we'd done. Right? He says, on my way out of the scanning suite, a family is coming in. It's a little girl with her mom and dad, and the girl is crying. And so just kind of casually, he said to the operator, and as they pass, the dad is talking to the daughter, and he says, honey, we talked about this. You can be strong, right? Right? And so he asked the operator, so like, what's up here? He thinks it's some weird anomalous case. And the operator says to him, oh, Doug, you didn't ask me about this. She said, your machine scares the heck out of kids. In fact, to be honest, Doug, we got to anesthetize more than 80% of the kids we bring into this room in order to get them to survive the experience. Because they're just too scared. They can't go in. They can't sit still. Yeah, she says, kids really hate getting a scan in your machine. And Doug, who's this super sensitive guy, Doug cries 2 or 3 times telling this story, by the way. You can see him on TED. Doug has this crisis. He goes home and tells his wife that he might have to change jobs, he might have to change careers, because he's always been part of the healing process, and now he's thinking, I make big machines that scare the heck out of kids, right? And so Doug tells his boss this because he wears his heart on his sleeve. He can't keep this issue a secret in any way, and so his boss sends him to a class at Stanford University at a thing called the B School. And it's a week-long executive ed class in which he starts with empathy, he does prototyping, he does storytelling, he works with people from all different companies and all different divisions within the companies. And while he's there, he comes up with an idea, how to address his issue that he's working on. And, we all live in constrained environments. And making big medical imaging devices super constrained. It takes a very long time, very expensive, very highly regulated, and rightfully so, right? And so Doug can't really change the machine. But what he can do is he can change the experience. And, you're all basically in the experience business, right? And so this is what Doug does. He doesn't change the machine, and he doesn't get a ton of support from his company either, by the way. He gets an all-volunteer army, some friends from work, some people from a local children's museum, some people from the children's hospital, and together they create what becomes the Adventure series for GE Healthcare. A whole series of machines, including this one. This is a CAT scanner, which they don't change the machine at all, no regulatory requirements to go through, but they cover the machine with these colorful graphics. And they cover the floors and the walls, and most importantly, they write a script for the operator. And so now the operator will say, now Johnny, today you're going to go in the pirate ship, right? And when you're in there, you got to lay perfectly still because you don't want to move. The pirate will catch you. You think you can lay perfectly still? Yep, I can do that. And Johnny gets a little prize out of a treasure chest when he's done and things like that. And so Doug says, I come out with this product, and there's 9 of them now, the different designs. And he says, everybody's happy. He says, I work in an environment where everybody's got metrics. He says the hospital is really happy because they really dramatically increase the throughput in these machines, right? Because what happens is patient comes in, they make a judgment of whether the patient needs anesthesia or not, and then they call the anesthesiologist. And I don't know if you've ever called the anesthesiologist in a hospital, but I have, right? Usually in the neonatal ward, right? We're in delivery, and my wife will say, anesthesia now, and now is not like now. Now is not an anesthesiologist waiting outside the door. Now is like 45 minutes, maybe an hour sometimes, right? And it's the same with them. And so they got the patient waiting in this multi-million-dollar machine waiting for the anesthesiologist to come. And so no anesthesiology. Oh, by the way, rate of anesthesiology goes from over 80% to less than 10%. With no change except this change to the design and the script that goes along with it, right? And so Doug says hospital's really happy, right? He says GE's really happy. Market share goes up, big orders. Every pediatric hospital in America wants this. I mean, honestly, if you had an 8-year-old child and they were going in for an MRI, if there was a place in town that had this, wouldn't you actually drive a little further for your kid to have this experience instead of the big scary machine, right? And so he says, everybody's happy with their metrics. He says, I don't care about any of those. He says, here's my metric. He says, I go back all the time. He says, I don't talk to that operator. He says, she's got nothing for me. He says, I talk to the parents. I talk to the kids. He's back in the scanning suite one day talking to one of the moms about pina colada smell. He wants to do aromatherapy, inject pina colada smell into the scanning room. And I said, Doug, do kids even know what a pina colada is? And he says, oh, no, Tom. No, of course not. He says, it's for the parents. He says, the parents are really stressed out. And he says, my theory is that pina colada smell triggers a relaxation response in grown-ups, right? And who knows? That sounds right to me, actually. Anyhow, so Doug's there just prototyping this idea with this young mom. And as she's there, her daughter, who's just been scanned, she's like 6 or 7 years old, just been scanned, tugs on mom's skirt while she's talking to Doug. And eventually mom looks down and says, yes, honey, what is it? And the little girl looks up at mom, and Doug's right there. Little girl looks up at mom and says, Mommy, can we come back tomorrow? And so Doug says, I went from 80% requiring anesthesiology to, Mommy, could we come back tomorrow? He says, that's the only metric I need. Right? And so Doug, by the way, is one of these 100 people we interviewed. Doug is like glowing with energy. Doug has become an ambassador across GE, across all the divisions, telling his story about how he used this process of starting with empathy and how even in a business-to-business environment like GE, he found a way to add value for GE, for the customer, for the kids. Right? He now comes and teaches. He's adjunct faculty at Stanford University, telling his story. Right? And so he didn't just change one little thing. It wasn't just that he became creative. He became somebody having more impact on the world. So, and then back to this Vujade thing where you start to ask why questions. It's just as Doug looked at his business in an entirely different way. Ask yourself the following question, because these things are hidden all over the place. Now, they're not all hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years, but here's a case where it was, right? So I know that in some of your divisions, you know the hotel industry really well. Right? So ask yourself the following question. How many years have there been hotels in the world? Right? It's a very big number. It's got at least 4 digits. Right? And I know lots of cultures probably represented in the room, but some of you will remember a story from 2013 years ago. Right? No room at the inn. Right? So there were no rooms that night. The no vacancy sign was on, but there was an inn at least. Right? There was an inn, so there's proof that the hotel's been around for at least a couple of 1,000 years, right? And yet, it took the hotels of the world, the business hotels of the world, until about the year 2000 to figure out that, sure, when you go to the resort with your family, you care about the spa and the pool and all that kind of stuff, but if you check into that hotel in Cincinnati, Ohio at like 8 o'clock at night and you're checking out at 8 o'clock in the morning, it's all about the bed. How obvious could that be? Right? And so one hotel, if you remember, it was just one hotel chain first. It was Westin Hotels. Said, let's not change anything else and let's just have the best bed in the business. Right? And I talked to their head of marketing for the Starwood Group one time, and he said, not only did our market share go up, but he says, I can tell you in dollars and cents how much more people would pay to stay in a room with a heavenly bed than without it. And I stay 100 nights a year in hotels, and I went from, give me whatever hotel is closest to, got a hotel with a heavenly bed, right? And over a 5-year period, every major hotel matched. In fact, copied almost exactly, the same stripes on the sheets. I mean, it's exactly that bed, but it took them 5 years. And if you can be the innovator, if you can be the first to reach out, one, you win over some customers that you never subsequently lose. And two, you get the innovator's premium. You get it becomes a part of your brand that you're going to be first, right? And so it was there in front of everybody. It's just one hotel chain figured it out. For this really important traveler, the business traveler, just get this one thing, make this one thing better. By the way, shortly after this happened, I stayed at the Westin Hotel in Cincinnati, Ohio, and the sink was cracked in the bathroom, which you don't really expect in the Westin, right? And the wallpaper was peeling a little bit on the walls, and you know what? Couldn't have cared less, right? Slept like a baby in that heavenly bed, right? And so figure out for your customers, is there something that is so important to them that if you make it slightly better, it will screen out everything else, right? Is there something like that in your business that's been hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years? I doubt it, right? But if you look hard, if you ask those why questions, you might find something that works, something that is there. And if you can be the first to find it and then exploit it, your customers will notice. So that's the first one. Start with empathy. I promise the others will not be quite as long. Second one is treat life as an experiment. And this is just a cultural value that says we are the kind of place that tries stuff. And we try stuff, knowing that at least the stuff behind the scenes, it is not all going to succeed. They are truly experiments. And what we found is, both with your internal team and to the outside world, if you frame it as an experiment from the beginning, they'll cut you a lot of slack. Right? If everybody knows it's an experiment, it makes things easier. But wrapped up in this idea of experimentation, there is risk, and therefore there is failure. And none of us like the word, but you still got to be a little bit of that if you're out there taking risks. Just like when you learn to ski, you're going to have to fall down a little bit. Right? And so here's Thomas Edison, most prolific inventor in the history of America. Right? Even Edison, didn't like the word failure. He had experimentation built into his process every day. So at one point he says, I haven't failed. I've just found 1,000 ways that do not work. Right? Edison later said, the real measure of an organization is how many experiments they can cram into a 24-hour period. Right? And so it was the essence of his approach. Experiment, learn, right? But in that learning, each individual step, it's kind of a failure. But that, if you think of it as a failed experiment, it's not necessarily a failure as long as there's learning attached. As long as you're experimenting within constraints so that, nobody gets hurt, right? And so there's lots of examples out there of that. So I know you don't make physical products, but I'll give you an example from the physical world and then one maybe that's closer to your world. So this is embedded in every part of our business, right? And so just the idea that there will be concepts will float around the company at all time, that we'll have a faster flow of ideas than the average organization. And so here's an example that we're working at the time, is a few years ago, on a surgical tool. It's that tool on the right. It's for sinus surgery. They actually go in through your nose and they drill right up by your brain. Less said about that, the better. Anyhow, we're working on this tool. We started with empathy. We did a lot of observations in operating rooms and figured out what wasn't working and figured out what we're going to do differently, both about the way the tool is held and the way stuff flows through the tool and things like that. So we're in our Chicago office having a kind of a brainstorming session, and it doesn't seem to be progressing that well. And so one of our young engineers leaves the room for 5 minutes and comes back with, I think, the ugliest prototype in the history of my firm. That is if you can see, that's a whiteboard marker. That black thing, now an antique, that's a Kodak film canister, pried partway open, and a orange clothespin kind of thing, all taped together with Scotch tape. And he comes back in and hands it to the surgeon who's on the medical advisory board for our client organization, and hands it to the surgeon. And I have to say, in this culture of experimentation, this is a very important moment. Because if you laugh, if you mock that person, if you throw them out of your office, they know never to bring an unfinished idea to you, right? And so you will see fewer ideas. You'll see perfectly polished ideas, some of them really bad, right? But if you don't laugh, if you squint a little and just look at the shape of the idea, because this, in the category of ideas that aren't yet perfect, this one's awfully imperfect, right? But the surgeon does not laugh at him. The surgeon picks up this kind of fragile, ugly prototype and holds it in his hand a couple of ways, and he says, yeah, something a little bit like this. And so we went forward. I don't want you to think there were no other prototypes in between. There were. We went forward this precise surgical tool from the cheapest, ugliest prototype in our firm's history. And the lesson I learned, the product's called the IDEO. The lesson I learned from the IDEO project is got to find a way to lower the bar for prototyping to increase the rate of learning. And I know this is counterintuitive because you're always trying to raise the bar, right? It is the essence of business organizations. But if you can lower the bar at the front end of innovation, if you can lower the bar so that any single person in the whole company feels comfortable floating their idea, they know that their idea is not perfect yet, but they bring it to you trusting that in your experience, with your greater expertise, that you will at least try. You'll go through the mental effort to try to build on their idea as opposed to using all your smartness and expertise to show them why they're stupid. Right? If you will try to build, if you will encourage those things, you just watch and see how many new ideas you see. And by the way, the first time I showed this picture, I was in Texas and I showed this picture and there's a woman who raised her hand at that point and said, yes, Mr. Kelly, but what if we don't have the kind of creative people that you have that can do these prototypes? And I looked at her and I looked at the photo and I said, you're kidding, right? Like, which part is it the Scotch tape you think your people can't do? Because I think they can. Right? This is the essence of this idea is get it so low that anybody can do it and watch the flow of ideas that you see come through the organization. And so that's a small idea and it's from the physical world. Here's a bigger idea that cuts across all parts of a business, which is if you want to do big change is always scary. If you want to do big change, break it down into small experiments. And so here's an example of that. I'm good friends with Jim Hackett, CEO of Steelcase. And a long time ago now, Jim Hackett said to his senior management team, he said, hey, guys, it was mostly guys, hey, guys, he said, you know how we're the biggest maker of system furniture in the world? That would be cubicles to the rest of us, system furniture. He says, you know how we all sit in closed offices with wood paneling in it? He says, anybody think that's a little bit weird? He says, I do. Right? And what he could have done next is said, big change, old way, new way. But he didn't do that. He said to his senior management team, to the whole level of people reporting to him, he says, I propose the following experiment. He said, I'm going to leave your office intact. I'm going to bring you out into what he calls the open-air leadership community. And he says, all I ask of you is that you give it an honest try for the next 6 months. And so he didn't say, like, you have to do it this way. He says, just give it an honest try for the next 6 months. And then my promise to you, and he's a guy of deep integrity, and so this is an important part of the experiment, my promise to you is that whatever is not working 6 months from now, we will address. He did not promise you can go back to your old office, but he said, we will address whatever is not working. And so he said if he'd done the big change approach, he'd have had one by one every executive explaining why they were a special case and couldn't go into the open-air leadership community. But by proposing the little experiment, I mean, honestly, who could say, no, boss, 6 months, I don't think I could do that, right? Nobody could say that, and nobody did, right? And so they all went along. And 19 years later, they're still in the open-air leadership community, and they deeply believe that it has helped them be more effective, right? But he broke big change down into a little experiment. He made a social contract with the people who were participating in the experiment, and he got big change to happen. It was a sea change in the way that those managers behaved and the way they communicated with each other. But he did it with an experiment. So, start with empathy. Treat life as an experiment. Third of the 3 ideas is about leveraging the power of storytelling. And we completely ignored this in the first, I would say, 20 years of IDEO. Because we, coming from technical backgrounds, we thought that the data should speak for itself. And you know what? The data is awful at speaking for itself. And so data, I'll give you a number, you'll start forgetting it right away. But everyone in this room is carrying around stories that you heard from early childhood, right? And so we believe if you've got something that's a message that's important, whether it's to your internal team or the outside world, wrap it in a story, and the story will carry you through. So I have a book in which I have a chapter about storytelling, but way better than my chapter is this book called Made to Stick, in which these guys, Chip and Dan Heath, talk about the essence of great storytelling. They talk about urban myths. Why is an urban myth so sticky, so viral, and yet your story, your marketing message, or the story of your team doesn't seem to stick at all? And so they break down an urban myth, and just briefly they say, urban myths all have simplicity. They can be told start to finish in like under 2 minutes. They said, you have curse of knowledge. You know too much about your stuff, but you have to boil it down. You have to find a way to make it simpler. They have an unexpected element, something involving kidney harvesting or something like that. They have some concreteness. They put you in the room. They use, visual storytelling techniques to help you imagine stuff. They have some source of credibility. They have emotion attached to them because it's the emotion that helps things stick, and they're told in the form of a story. And so if you watch out there, you'll see this everywhere. As I said, I go to Japan a lot, and so as nearly as I can tell, 100% of the population of Japan over about the age of 3 knows the story of this dog. The dog is called Hachiko, and some Americans have seen a very bad Richard Gere movie, and some of them know this story, but everybody in Japan knows the story. And briefly, the story is Hachiko, this very faithful dog, walks with his master to work every day at the Shibuya station and waits there for the master to come home. And, the Japanese workday, pretty long. So we're talking about a patient dog, right? Waits there for the master to come back from work and then walks home with them. And then one day, true story, there's a picture of the real dog there. True story, the master has a heart attack at work and never comes home. And the dog stays rooted to that spot and dies there years later, right? And this is not a story about a dog. Of course, there's a dog in the story, but this is a story about faithfulness and loyalty and things that Japanese society values greatly. And so they've wrapped it in a story, and so they tell it to their children, and they tell it to their students, and it gets retold. And you meet anybody, anybody who lives in Tokyo, or even a visitor who's been in Tokyo for more than a couple of weeks, and if you say to them, I'll meet you at Hachiko, they know exactly what you mean, because there's a statue for that dog. From 80 years ago, there's still a statue for that dog in Tokyo today, right? The story is still being told and retold. Wouldn't you like your story to be told 80 years from now, right? And so, you use whatever storytelling techniques are available. And a really good one for you is video. Because, if you have services, we talk about telling a story or painting a picture of the future with your idea in it. And so we were working with the Sesame Street folks on an iPhone app called Elmo's Monster Maker, and we wanted to put in this feature in which Elmo dances. And they weren't so sure. And 1 hour before our last meeting, where we were solidifying what the specification for the app was going to be, our team said, look, we got to get this dancing thing in. And so with 1 hour, so this is not an expensive video, with 1 hour, they make a video that simulates the app, because Elmo's complicated. He's got, puppeteer and all that. So they simulate the app with Adam standing in for Elmo. And you touch Adam's nose and he dances and music plays. And they make this in 45 minutes actually and send it to New York, email it to New York, and it's there for the meeting. And the Sesame Street folks agreed that we'll put this feature into the app. And so we had something we believed in that we did this very, very simple story on that got adopted because we used this storytelling technique. And only after they said yes did we reveal how we made that thing so quickly, which is there is no iPhone there. There is a piece of cardboard with a rectangle cut out of it, and Adam is looking through the hole in the cardboard, right? We cheated. Of course we cheated. We took the quickest, cheapest way we could to get our story across, and you can do the same thing. There is no high production values here. Every single person on your team could have made this video, right? And so this is what you want to do, is find your storytelling method, your medium, to make your idea stick. So, 3 simple ideas. 1, always start with empathy. There is always learning to be had out there at the front lines of your business. 2, treat life as an experiment. Try to set up a social contract with your team, ideally with your customers, and say, we're going to try some stuff, and then you're going to tell us what worked and what didn't work, but we're kind of all in this together. And 3, leverage the power of storytelling, because you have ideas, you have messages that I know you want to get across, that you want to get sticky, that you want to be repeated and carried on by others. And if you wrap your message in a story, it'll be much more powerful out there in the world. If you can do that, those 3 things will help you build and reinforce and nurture your own unique culture of creativity and innovation. Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you. So I've heard you have questions. If the speakers have gone before you, said there's no shortage of questions here, and so we'll start. Oh, do we need a microphone? We'll start here.
What's the best method to incorporate customer input into the creative process? Because like your illustration there of the medicine bottle,
right.
A lot of times either they lie, they don't know how to articulate what they want, what they need. So what is your methodology for incorporating customers?
Right. So we're sending teams out into the field all the time, and we'll typically send a team of 3 or 4 people. You know, if you just send one person out, if you just send like a professional anthropologist out, you get into this whole he said, she said thing where people say, oh, no, you didn't really see that. You know, you show them the video clip. No, you didn't understand what was happening there, you know, whatever. Whereas if you send a multidisciplinary team out, then they see it together. And this has happened literally thousands of times with our groups, and it's like, hey, look at that. And by the way, if you're with an anthropologist or someone acting in the anthropologist role, and they say, hey, look at that, pay close attention, because you can see all kinds of things. By the way, I talked to that CMO at Starwood Group, and he said, you know, we do a lot of this video ethnography. He says, you see all kinds of stuff. It's the one thing, and they've changed behavior in their hotels based on this. It was several years ago. They took videos of the front of the hotel, and there were all these videos of people arriving, like able-bodied people, arriving at the front of the hotel with their roller bags, you know, the luggage, and the bellman trying to wrestle the bag away from them. And what they said is, you know, that things had changed. That in the old days, people really wanted their baggage handled, but as soon as, you know, we put wheels on luggage, how long did it take us to figure that one out, by the way? That people wanted that it was not a service. You know, it was a service offering, but for many people it was negative that this person wrestles the bag away from me and now wants a tip and things like that. I don't want that. And so they trained their staff, they retrained their staff to look, to see, like, is this person going to want my help, and to maybe offer, but just offer a little bit, as opposed to like, here, let me take that, which was really the modal behavior up until then, and still exists at some hotels. And so they consistently watched. They picked a topic to work on, and they consistently watched it until they got insight, and then from that insight they changed behavior. And so I've literally 1,000 stories of that in our work. Anybody else raising their hand? Well, my answer was too long? Is that why? Day is too late. Okay. Is that it? I guess we're done. All right. Thank you very much. I didn't have questions.
Thank you, Tom, so
Okay.
much.
I'll leave you.
Likewise. You can see why Tom's company was cited as number 5 most innovative company of the year in that 2008 article, and since then, a highly admired company, very, very provocative assessments in product development. And a couple things come out and bring some questions in mind from what Tom was talking about. And the first is new methodologies for understanding the experience. Really key question for us. What are some new methodologies? He cited some behavioral observation type methodologies, in different forms and different structures, approached quite differently, not just focus groups, not asking questions, but a behavioral observation of experiences and of individuals working with products or just other experiences. Critical piece, what and where are different methodologies that could be incorporated into our businesses. The second question that really comes out from Tom's conversation with us is, from a big change that we think needs to happen, what's a first experiment in your business that might start, from that Scotch taping together? What's that first experiment, that first concept that can get a path as to getting us on a path of larger and more significant steps towards a change, but starting in a very, as you said, lower bar threshold to get the process started of innovation, and in this case, creativity leading to an innovation and success. Okay? Those are the key two. Well, now we're going to go into our break, and when we come back, we'll have our last speaker of the day. We'll have a 15-minute break in the atrium as we normally do. Look forward to seeing you shortly.